Ivy Sundell is the president and treasurer of Replace Plastic, which is dedicated to creating a sustainable and plastic-free future for the community. Ivy led the School and Community Save Our Energy Challenge for individuals to save electricity and water at home for over 15 years. She believes that the grassroots approach may be the solution to our plastic problem. Please welcome Ivy Sundell.
All right, I started Replace Plastic. Oh, going back to, I'm Ivy Sundell. I actually live in Winnetka, but I started Replace Plastic in Skokie because I met somebody at the Rotary Club there who was very supportive of my project. So when I started 3 years ago, I was thinking of waste. I was thinking about the environment, just like everybody else did. And along the lines, around a year or so ago, I just realized that it is not just the environment and the waste, it is our health. It turns out that plastic is toxic and nobody talks about it. People just talk about the good qualities, how flexible, how cheap, how, that it's waterproof and heat resistant and this and that, and this with grease resistant, I should say. And they don't talk about the bad qualities because, is it not loud enough?
Maybe be closer to the microphone?
I have the microphone. Sorry.
She is the microphone.
Yeah, I tend to talk soft and then my voice drops off. So that's why I wanted my own. So I don't want to be holding anything or sticking my head into something. It works for everybody back there?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, so I began to realize that it has more to do with human health than the environment and waste, which is still there, but it's more important that it's affecting our health. And we're trying to think about, before my session, somebody was asking about reduce, reuse, and recycle. And I was like, we definitely don't want to recycle them, no matter what they tell you, because the plastic industry wants you to recycle, think recycle, and, but it is toxic. We don't want to turn it into something else that's also toxic. So, but I'm still learning every day, and I want to show you my website, which has the excerpt from an expert who talked in my session 6 months ago. And his name is Dr. Robert Sargis. He is part of U of Illinois College of Medicine. And he's a researcher, he's a physician, and he's a professor. So he's in this industry and he knows what he's talking about. I'm the student. And then after his talk, I'm going to expand a little bit on what he was talking about. Hopefully I clarify things for you instead of adding more cloud. And then I want you to all to share your experiences and talk about tips for replacing plastic in your life. This is my website. Like I mentioned, the excerpt that I'm going to show this morning, right? It's right there. So you can go home and look at it if it's, you want to see certain spots again. I have a couple of projects right now that works with Geetha Foods and Winnetka Farmers Market, and also with Sketchbook Brewery in Skokie and Evanston. And they're trying to encourage people to use cotton bags instead of plastic. I also collect some paper bags as a supplement in the stores. I mostly work with retail stores, and I need supplements for when people forget their cloth bags. I want to have something there that's not plastic. But down here is a whole bunch of tips for plastic alternatives that we're going to talk about. And I also have a little bit of some flyers here that you can pick up. On the website, there's also a page for resources. It goes there. And it has a whole lot of articles that you may be interested in. And if so, go ahead and check it out. The website, by the way, is replaceplastic.org. Replaceplastic.org.
Thank you.
So now I'm going to go to the expert, and so you can see Dr. Robert Sarge's presentation, and he's the expert. Find this. We'll go to and we'll start.
Technologists have a research lab focused on endocrine disrupting chemicals, some of which are found in plastics. So just by way of disclosures, I do some consulting, speaking, also do a little bit of community engagement work. My scientific mission is really to understand how humans alter the environment and how those alterations impact human health. And I'm a physician scientist, so I care for patients. I was in the clinic this morning. So an important focus of what I do is to really try to understand how we can translate knowledge of environmental exposures into action in order to improve human health. We're here to talk about plastics today, and I think that these pictures basically sum up how many people think about plastics. We think about this as a macro problem of plastic pollution that's contaminating our oceans, our land, basically everywhere we look, we see an environment that's contaminated with plastics. But what I want to emphasize to everybody today is what we're really talking about is a diverse family of different risk factors. So those macroplastics that we consider are just one part of this. So these plastics that we incorporate into every aspect of our lives get broken down into these micro and nanoplastics that are increasingly recognized as having potentially adverse health effects. And what's also important is that these plastics are not just a problem because they're plastics, but these plastics are also vehicles of exposure to chemicals that are in those plastics that are non-covalently bound that can alter things like hormone signaling, cancer risk, and all sorts of different adverse health effects. So when we're thinking about plastics, what we're really thinking about is a problem that extends from those plastic bags to their breakdown products, to the chemicals that they're leaching into the environment and into our bodies. So one of the things that sort of drives me is this idea that we have many people in this country who are suffering from ill health. And the question that we face as clinicians is, how are we going to best protect the health of our loved ones, our patients, our family members, our communities? And every time I think about this, I think about Fannie Lou Hamer, who, if you don't know, was a civil voting and women's rights activist who gave this famous speech 60 years ago in which she said, "I am sick and tired of being sick and tired." And I think that that ethos is something that we should all be thinking about, and because we all should be sick and tired of the suffering that we witness amongst our friends, our family, and our community. And as such, we need to step up to address those drivers of adverse health that have been neglected for many years. I'm going to focus on one particular disease that I think illustrates the issue of plastics, and it's a disease that's near and dear to my heart because it's what affects most of the patients I see, and that's diabetes. And I'm going to make the argument that diabetes is actually a disease that's amplified by plastics. So we're all on the same page. Diabetes is a disease that afflicts somewhere around 537 million people globally, with 783 million people projected to have the disease by the year 2045. It is not just a disorder that affects folks in the United States and Western Europe. The highest increases in diabetes rates are in places like Southeast Asia, the Middle East and North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And what's important about diabetes is while we think about it because it raises blood sugars, it's important to recognize that this disease is the leading cause of adult blindness, kidney failure, non-traumatic amputations, and a potent driver of cardiovascular disease, which is what kills most people. And its economic impact is staggering. So other than sort of just the human toll, the economic impact is estimated to be about $413 billion in the United States alone, and it's projected to be over $1 trillion globally by the year 2045. So this is a disease that has immense individual and community and in fact global impact. So what's the connection with plastic? So this is a slide that we put together back in 2011. So this is going to illustrate two basic things. So what you see here in red is diabetes rates in the United States from 1958 to 2008. And what you can see is this exponential increase in diabetes rates in the United States, right? What I'm showing in blue is synthetic chemical production in the United States from 1938 to 2008. And there's this little blip downward here in 2008 that is not a reduction in manufacturing that's real. That's just the economic downturn from the recession in 2008. And what you can appreciate from these two curves is how they move together. That the rise in diabetes rates is occurring at the same time that synthetic chemical production is increasing in the United States. Now this is not evidence of causation, right? But it's really interesting to think whether these two things are potentially linked together. And many of those synthetic chemicals are used in plastics or the production of plastics. So the question has become over time, is it possible that these two phenomena linked in time are actually mechanistically linked, that they are associated by scientific evidence that the chemicals that we're putting into our environment are actually contributing to the development of diabetes? So what are these chemicals? So these chemicals are sort of these amazing inventions that have happened since the 1930s. So these include chemicals that are used in food production, so including agricultural pesticides, things like pesticides, food additives, packaging materials. There are chemicals that are generated through industrial activity. They're the chemicals that we choose to use, the chemicals we put on our bodies and use in our homes in personal and home care products. And in a separate thing that we can talk about on the side, there are chemicals that are actually used in medical care as well. But what's important is across all of these classes, many of these chemicals are actually used in plastics. And these include chemicals like bisphenols, phthalates, these perfluoroalkyl substances that are getting a ton of attention. They include things like flame retardants and other chemicals as well. So what we're talking about is a diverse array of chemicals used in a variety of products that could potentially be linked to adverse health effects. And so we're on the same page. This is a slide that I use with students all the time. What is diabetes? So diabetes is an elevation in blood glucose levels that causes myriad problems with health. Normally, blood sugars are kept in a very tight range through the action of insulin. The problem is that most of society is going in the opposite direction. We're sleeping less, we're more stressed, we're gaining more weight, we're less physically active. And what happens is we become progressively more insulin resistant. We move up from point A to point C, and our body's got to fight to keep those blood sugars under control. And the problem is, the longer that fight goes on, the more those cells start to fail, and the more you start to deteriorate and your blood sugars start going up. You first sort of enter into this phase of impaired glucose tolerance, in which your blood sugars are high after you eat. And then you ultimately develop what's known as frank type 2 diabetes, in which your blood sugars are high basically all the time. So that's how diabetes develops. So what does this have to do with pollution in any way? The evidence suggests that, and this is evidence from cells, animals, human studies, even clinical trials, have shown that the chemicals that we're exposed to can make the insulin in our body work less well, can drive insulin resistance, and can also impair our ability to make enough insulin to keep our blood sugars under tight control. So what you have are chemicals that hit both of these sides that lead to this deterioration in health and potentiate the development of diabetes. And you may say, well, I'm only exposed to one thing here. Like, does that really matter? But the fact of the matter is, each of us has somewhere between 2,000 and 3,000 different chemicals in our body. And you can imagine that a few on this panel and a few on this panel adds up to death by 1,000 cuts. And when you add that to physical inactivity, you add that to weight gain, what you have is a recipe for these environmental drivers to force the development of the disease and potentiate the development of diabetes. So, and this is evidence that's been accruing over the course of the last 20 years. And as I said, robust evidence from cells all the way to humans pointing at these connections. And so the other question then becomes, well, okay, what's the magnitude of this effect? Like, is this really impactful when we think about all the other things that might be leading to the development of diabetes? And I would argue that it is. So the best scientific evidence that we have when we look at population studies in humans are meta-analyses. Meta-analyses that put together a bunch of different studies and basically ask the question, if you're exposed to high levels of chemical A versus low levels of chemical A, what is the risk of diabetes? And what these analyses have shown is that those who are most highly exposed to bisphenol A have a 28% higher risk of developing diabetes. That's pretty significant. Those with the highest levels of phthalate exposures have a twofold higher risk of developing diabetes. And this goes on and on for each of these chemicals. And what's important is that these same chemicals aren't just linked to diabetes, but they're linked to other metabolic disorders like obesity, fatty liver disease, as well as other conditions. And what's important also to remember about this data is that this data is looking at single chemicals or small families of chemicals. It's not taking into account the reality of how we are exposed to these chemicals, which is as mixtures. So if each of these contributes that same type of effect, what you see is a gross magnification of the risk imposed by exposure to these chemicals that are found in plastics. The other thing that is important to recognize is that we're not all equally vulnerable to these chemicals, and there are certain windows of exposure in which people are particularly sensitive. And so this was a patient called me a couple of months ago and basically said, Doc, so this is a patient that I see at the VA. He said, Doc, I know I've been exposed. So he was exposed to Agent Orange during his service during Vietnam. He said, I know I've been exposed, but I want to know what this means to my kids and what this means to my grandkids. And the reason that this is important is that the scientific evidence suggests that when we're exposed to these chemicals in plastic during early periods of life, during in utero life, when we're in the womb, or shortly after birth, that those adverse effects are multiplied. That you can have those exposures occurring early in life that increase your risk of developing a disease later in adulthood, even if that exposure stops. So when we talk about what we're doing with plastics, we're not just affecting individuals, but we're affecting generations. And those generations may experience reverberations of these diseases that go on for generations through through different forms of inheritance. So the other thing is that diabetes is a disease of injustice. So we have known for a very long time that Black, Hispanic, Indigenous, and low-income communities experience higher rates of diabetes than other communities. The other thing is we have known that for a long time, and we still have done very little to address those disparities. Some of those are actually still increasing. So my lab has done a little bit of work to say, well, is it possible that these high rates of diabetes in these vulnerable communities are amplified by higher exposures to these chemicals? And I would say this, these communities not only have higher rates of disease, but they also are more likely to develop the consequences of that disease. If you're Black in America, you are 2 times more likely to die from diabetes than if you're a non-Hispanic. So the question my lab has asked is whether this could potentially be related to exposures to chemicals and plastics, and the answer is potentially yes. So we've done a number of different analyses to show that low-income communities of color have higher levels of exposure to these chemicals. These aren't the only communities that are exposed, but these are some of the communities that experience the highest rates of exposure. So when we think about disease disparities, this is something that has long been neglected and needs to be addressed. So we care, I think, not only because this is a justice issue, but we care because it affects other aspects of this disease. So as I said, I'm a clinician who cares for people with diabetes. We have an increasing burden of a disease that is increasingly expensive and causing significant morbidity and mortality. So the question is, could there be a better way? And what I would argue is when we look at plastics and the adverse effects imposed on our health by plastics, that includes not just diabetes, but disorders like obesity, thyroid disease, fatty liver disease, cardiovascular disease, neuropsychiatric disorders, cancer, and infertility. The better question is, why not reduce the risk of all of these by reducing our exposure to these chemicals overall? This has the potential of having myriad benefits to health that extend beyond just one disease, but can help across various aspects of medicine. This is becoming a big deal because we're seeing stories appear in the popular press. So there's an article in The Guardian about microplastics found in every human testicle that was studied. We're finding chemicals from food packaging leaching into food on NPR. You got articles in People magazine talking about plastics from bags and bottles found in every human placenta. And The Atlantic talking about the risks of microplastics. So this was a study that was published this year in the New England Journal of Medicine that looked at the carotid plaques in people with atherosclerosis. And I want to just show you this slide. This is actually just a picture of those plastics in those atherosclerotic plaques. And what I just want to show you over here is that what they did in this study is they compared individuals who had plastic in their plaques versus who didn't have plastics in their plaques. And what they found is those people who had plastics had a 4.5 times higher risk of having a major adverse cardiovascular event. That's a heart attack, that's a stroke, that's a hospitalization for heart disease. So these are even in individuals who have cardiovascular disease, if you got plastics, the risk of a complication of that disease is greater. And we'll need to see replication of this study. This is the first one. But the great thing about this was in the New England Journal of Medicine, which is the preeminent medicine journal. So we're starting to get more attention amongst physicians, which I think will hopefully help. That some of these chemicals that are in plastics that we're exposed to stick around for a really long time. So these persistent chemicals stay in our body despite the fact that we close exposure or end exposure. So there are some tricks that we propose in the paper that may be helpful for reducing the body burden of some of those chemicals as well, that include things like high fiber diets and other things that might be able to interfere with how these chemicals are actually used. And what I hope that you'll get from today is that plastics are not just an issue of waste, but they're an issue of human health. What I really want to emphasize is that unlike genetics, environments are modifiable. We can do something about this. We can choose a better path forward. We just have to do it together. I also just want to mention that we at the University of Illinois Chicago have an environmental health center that puts on talks that you'd all be welcome to attend. You should check out our website. Our center is CACHE. It's the Chicago Center for Health and Environment. It's joint between the University of Illinois Chicago and the University of Chicago. It's a great resource for the community and would welcome any and all of your engagement.
Great. So I want to expand on some of the things he says. I hope it doesn't make it worse because I have a tendency to research everything people say and make sure I understand it and it makes sense to me. So I found out that plastic is like it has a carbon hydrogen backbone, and all these chemicals are kind of what he talked about, non-covalent bonds. That means they're not really bonded together. It just sits on it to make all these other properties that we like, it being flexible and clear and waterproof and all that stuff. And there is no plastic without those chemicals, because the reason why we like them is because of those chemicals. And that's why it's so important that we reduce our use of plastic. The chemicals, there are 16,000 chemicals identified that's related to plastic. And a lot of times we just identify a few of them and we test a few of them and then we ban a few and we say, oh, don't use bisphenol A or phthalates or PFAS or some of those things. But what happens is you see packages that say we're PFAS free, we're this and that free. But guess what? In order to make the plastic as usable as we like them, they have to substitute other chemicals. So they go to bisphenol S, which is supposed to be more toxic. So they don't, because we didn't test all these chemicals, we can't say which one, and we're not going to go and research each one because nobody else is researching it for you. So that's why the advice is to stay away from plastic, especially when it relates to your food. We can also get plastic in us, not just by breathing and drinking, but also breathing it in because it's in the air. They have found microplastics all over the world, on the top of mountains, and of course on either poles and in the water, that we know, but it's actually in the air and it falls back down on the soil and we grow crops on them. And so all our food supply, not just the fish, is contaminated. So that's why we need to scale back from, not stop eating, mind you, but scale back from using plastic. We shouldn't add more to it. We need to cut back and as much as possible so that the world would eventually be away from it. There's a strong push to use more plastic because we are thinking of using more renewable fuel, and the plastic manufacturer, which is, by the way, also the oil and gas fuel providers, they want to move away from fuel into plastic because they want to make their profit. And so we are going to resist that. We are not going to do more plastic and contaminate our bodies. The chemicals in the plastic are found to be carcinogens, cause cancer, neurotoxicants, and that cause brain damage. And a big thing he mentioned was endocrine disruptors. And I don't know if you know what that is. Does anybody know what that is? Right,
It affects hormones.
yes. But
That's a short answer.
yes, that is a very good answer. It is, it affects our hormones. And our hormones is not just our sex hormones. It's just not just the estrogen and the testosterone. It is something that affects everything. We have like eight or, approximately eight big glands in the body. And there's one of the main ones is like thyroid gland, which is in your neck. It's like a butterfly shape. And it controls your metabolism, the way you convert food into energy. It affects your heart rate. So if you have rapid heartbeat, that has something to do with your thyroid. It has to do with your body temperature. People will get hot flashes, It affects, basically, it signals a lot of things in your body. It even signals your skin and bones, cell replacement, like, how the cells die and it needs to be replaced. It signals that, it tells you, okay, you need to replenish that. Then there's the parathyroid, which sits right behind the thyroid, which controls your calcium level. That if you don't get the right signals, you can get osteoporosis. You get the thymus gland, which controls production of white blood cell, the T cell portion of white blood cell, which controls how you fight infections. So it's like, and then of course the pancreas, which controls your blood sugar level. So all of these glands affect everything in our body, your muscles, your bones, your skin, all the organs. So that's why when he just mentioned endocrine disruption, that is really scary. That causes all these diseases. Now, it is not the single cause. It could be, lack of activity and lack of sleep and stress and all these other causes. But when you have a microplastic in you, which, by the way, breaks down even further after a while into nanoplastic, which is even smaller, then it sits in the cells and it kind of blocks the signaling of your hormones to the rest of your body to tell them when to do, when to digest your food, when to regulate your body in all kinds of ways. So it is very important that we don't ingest more microplastic than we need to. Now, I'm going to tell you something about my experience and how I think it's related to microplastic in my life. My mom had kidney cancer, and I didn't relate that to anything to do with plastic because, that's just all of a sudden she has. But now that I am aware of plastic, I realize that every morning she likes these nuts and seeds and she has different bags of them in plastic bags. And she's the kind who would save plastic bags, don't waste, reuse the same one. And it's very important. There's all these plastic bags. And I never thought that it's connected. I was like, oh my gosh, I understand now why she suddenly got kidney cancer. Another story has to do with my dog. He has oily skin, and I got him a vinyl bed. I didn't think twice about it because here's the bed that is easy to clean. doesn't absorb grease. So that I was like, this is perfect for him. And guess what? He had skin cancer. And then he licks himself a lot. I put a vinyl, a plastic cone on him. And guess what? His neck was full of lumps, and the vet kept saying, oh, that's just allergy. It wasn't allergy, it was tested later as skin cancer as well. So it's like all these things I didn't think of because it does what I want it to do, but it's actually because I'm giving him cancer through plastic. So I'm just wanting you to be aware. I went to a store. I go to a lot of businesses to try to sell them the idea of switching over from plastic. And there's one store, I won't tell you which one, but they are very proud to be using 1 million plastic bags a month. And this guy sitting, the store manager sitting in the office, was so obese he cannot get out of his seat. But I was just realizing now, like, you know, if you breathe in that much plastic and handle all these plastic every day, it's got to affect you somehow, you know? So anyways, that's what I have. I wonder if you have noticed anything in your life, if you notice anybody else or yourself having any illnesses, and maybe you happen to use a lot of plastic, especially with your food. Does anybody have that experience, or nobody ever thought about it? Yeah.
Are these chemicals natural in the environment without plastic?
No, they're produced.
They're produced just by plastic.
Not just for plastic, for all other things too. They're like, somebody quoted a number like 325,000 chemicals on there. So plastic, the ones associated plastic, they have identified 16,000 of them. So there are lots of chemicals out there, but plastic does not exist without them.
In the city of Wilmette, they started a program of collecting any kind of plastic that's difficult to get rid of. Bags, mostly plastic bags from wrapping groceries or whatever, plastic bags. The only trouble is you have to buy at the hardware store a special plastic bag to put the plastic bags in. So it's a bright orange, regular garbage size plastic bags, and you fill it full of plastic bags. It is really quite shocking how full my plastic bag is in not too much more than 2 weeks. I mean, I've got that bag stuffed half full of plastic bags. Damn, and what are they going to do with the plastic? Somehow they pluck it out of the process in the recycling. And then they've got a big plastic bag with 1 million little plastic bags in it. So then they plan to recycle all that plastic, right?
Mhm. Yeah, yes, it's the hefty renew program. And they came up with this gimmick that
I just have a
you-
comment. If anyone gets to the science and industry, the Griffin Science and Industry on the south side, they have an excellent, excellent program on plastics and how it's affecting it really makes you think. So it's worth going to the museum.
okay, is there anybody with any illness that you thought might be related to plastic? Everybody's healthy and
You just don't think about illness.
right,
Plastic.
right, exactly. It didn't dawn on me till later that oh my gosh.
I've read so many articles about the particles, small plastic particles that exist in the oceans. way down in Lake Michigan. And it's in which we all, most of us get water from Lake Michigan and it's coming in. And I wondered, I haven't read of any solution to that problem. But it's in the fish and the things we eat that come out of the ocean and out of the waters. And the rivers around the world, you read about London and have done water studies of all these. It's a terrible worldwide problem. I haven't heard of a solution.
Yeah, the solution
Yeah.
is to reduce and not use as much as possible. The solution is not to recycle, because in order to recycle, that's a good idea, but I think it's promoted by the plastic industry that it could be recycled.
One solution is not going to Costco and buying all those bottles of water.
Thank you.
I mean, that's where a big amount of the plastic is.
Yes.
We've got better water from our faucets than is in those bottles, because the bottles are in the, are plastic. The other, though, I wondered is, what on earth do we collect our garbage in that we take to our garbage can? I mean, a paper bag won't work. So
Yeah.
we pick up some plastic bags just because we have to have something to get our garbage out. Even though we're doing the recycling of the, what do we call it? The sustainable stuff, where we got the yellow garbage can and we're, collecting all the food and stuff in the house, but you still got wet stuff. So you've got to have a plastic bag to get your garbage into the garbage can.
I just want to say why you shouldn't recycle, because in order to recycle plastic bags or whatever, the plastic breaks down. You can't just turn it into another plastic bag. You have to add new plastic and new chemicals in order to make it, because it is not just, just turn this one into that one. And of course, knowing that it's toxic, you don't want to touch it. I just don't want to touch it,
Yeah, I'd like to add on to that. I've read where it is increasingly difficult to recycle all of the plastics because there's so many different kinds of plastics. Whatever we throw out into the recycling bin has many different formulas, and they can't all be melted together, particularly the plastic bags that are increasingly bad. And I have another question too. Are various governments giving any encouragement, coming out with programs to eliminate plastic bags, whether it's local or national?
The state tried many times, but the plastic industry is pretty strong. And there's a lot of lobbying against it. But they have been trying this year, I think for a few years now, that there is a plastic bag ban, there's a foam ban. So they're trying for legislation.
So I have a question.
Yes.
How much trouble am I in with plastic glasses that I wear?
Yeah, well, as long as you don't eat it. I found over the year and a half or so, when I tried to move away from plastic, that it's almost impossible to entirely get rid of plastic. So I would encourage people just to start small, start with your kitchen and all the stuff around your food as much as possible. I use cotton bags when I shop. I also use these, I actually don't use them, but I see that a lot of people use them. So I got a whole lot of these mesh bags for produce and fruits and vegetables.
What are they for?
Fruits and vegetables. You know how some people, in the fruit and vegetable section, they always have these plastic bags. Well, actually, I don't use them at all, but if you feel like you have to use something, then some people like to separate them from other stuff or whatever.
Ivy, how do you,
Cotton.
Ivy, how do you,
I got all these from, these are all organic cotton.
Ivy, how do you heat up, I'm back here at the microphone from Zoom. How do
Yes.
you heat up food in the microwave? How do you use your microwave to heat up food? Do you use any plastics at all?
No, definitely don't use plastic. Actually, plastic sheds microplastic without being heated. So definitely don't heat it.
Okay, another.
That would get right into your
Question
food.
from Zoom. What does the speaker, Diana is asking, what does the speaker think about all the plastics a diabetic uses? Syringes, glucose sensors, insulin delivery systems,
Yeah,
all which are some form of plastic used to keep them alive.
yes, that's what Dr. Sargis was talking about, that it's used in medical supplies. Actually, not just that. I just remember when my kids were young, the breast pump for breast milk. It's all plastic. The tube is plastic, the pump is plastic, everything is plastic. And I didn't know.
Over the last 3 years, I've had the pleasure of visiting with French families in France, of course, and to watch how they absolutely do nothing with plastic. There is no plastic. You go to a store, you won't see plastic. You'll bring your own you'll bring your own bag, and you will not bring plastic. It's that way over Europe, and we're just the last people in town, I think, to be playing with this, and we pay the plastic bags like they're part of our growth. They're just the opposite, of course. Thank you.
Question. If we have plastic, should we not throw it in the recycling container?
Well, I still do because I don't know what to do with it, but it's actually doesn't. It's more to make you feel good than actually doing anything.
I can mention, there's a representative Gong Gershowitz, and she's from Northbrook. She has different portions of the northern suburbs, but she is insistent on getting rid of plastic. When she gets a delivery from any store that Uber bring or DoorDash or whatever, she sends it back. She will not accept anything that has plastic. And until people, I don't know if we have transportable forks, stop using the plastic silverware in all the stores, it's impossible. We're just a slave to it.
Yeah, we don't realize that the good old days are actually good old days when it relates to plastic. Yes.
So I just read this article and I forget the author's name. He wrote a book and he went from our trash to where it actually ends up. And I now throw my plastics out because those plastics that don't get recycled are going to third world countries and going to places that are just polluting the rest of the world. So better off ending in our landfill and keeping it here, and maybe they'll start to do something about it than shipping it to other people who are innocent and don't really need our trash.
That's a good point. Yes. I want to add, I also use water bottles for bringing into restaurants and whatnot, so you don't have to drink out of. Good, that's a good one. I don't always remember. That's the thing. And then they give me a glass in a plastic cup, and I was like, no, I don't want that water. Yes.
Hi, good morning. What is the function that causes the shedding of plastic into microplastics? You mentioned it wasn't necessarily heat, but what other processes are taking place that cause it to break down?
It's just normal wear. Remember I said there is the carbon hydrogen backbone of the plastic? And then all these chemicals are just sitting on it. They're not embedded in it. It's just sitting on top. And, you know, if you shake it, and actually there is a study that's talked about that you open a bag, a plastic bag, and all these microplastic is already shedded.
Ivy,
Yeah.
this is important. I want to put it on tape. When we were coming here this morning on PBS, there was a British news program where Professor Tobin Marks from Northwestern University said that they developed a catalyst that breaks down plastic. And this is remarkable. And he's making sure that more people learn about this. But this is a Dr. Tobin or Professor Tobin Marks from Northwestern. That a catalyst will break down the plastic. So I just want to make sure you were aware of that. Can maybe check it out. Tobin Marks.
Yes, I've heard of a lot of the Northwestern studies on breaking down the plastic. But again, what are they going to do with it? Are they going to ship it to somebody, plastic industry, to reuse the plastic and attach different chemicals to it? What are they doing? It's not like it's disappearing, you know, it is making into something else. And that's the whole recycling idea that we want to get away from. Sorry.
I have more of a comment than
Yes.
actually a question, but the comment is that we as people do not feel that we are involved by this problem, but we obviously are. For example, my diabetes is a product of my overuse of water bottles. I used to drink in playing golf professionally, at least 4 or 5 bottles of water a round because you needed the water. And here I'm ingesting in my system the plastic. The other difficulty that you have is that every single container in the grocery stores is made with plastic. Furthermore, is the plastic not only creates a medical, a physical, but also a physical problem. For example, those little rings that are made of plastic that are around bottles, which everybody buys when they go to the store, and they don't stop buying them. They feel they have to have them to hold the bottles together. If they discard them or even put them in the trash, they wind up often in the water. And what happens is animals put their heads in these plastic and they get killed. The other problem is a plastic related to styrofoam. I think we've already related that styrofoam is a horrible thing, and the state of Illinois has outlawed it. However, every body that somehow has a nonprofit relationship can use styrofoam. And we as people allow it to happen because we participate in it. And a good example is this morning's coffee group is in styrofoam cups.
Oh.
So my comment is that how do we lobby to finally get some change in industry if we participate in it?
I think a lot of it is from demand. If people think of all the good qualities and not the bad ones, they would be using. And if you buy it, you're investing in it. So if everybody invests in it, then they want to produce more. But if we stop investing in that, you know, don't think of the industry's fault. Well, they are, but you are a willing participant in it. You're investing in them. So that's why you have the power to take it back and not do that.
But it can do it.
Yes, there are lots of things that you can't, like it's really hard.
But that's a plastic, isn't it?
Yeah, there's, yes. Yes, there are lots of things that come in plastic. So can I continue with it first, or my list of things before you have comments? Kitchen utensils, cutting boards. I switched recently to wood and solid wood without all these joints that is used with glue. And before that, I was using a paper version, a lot of the products, you have to think about the processing, not just the original wood. You know, how do they get here? And that's this hard thing to research. So a lot of times I type in this thing and then I put chemicals and I would see that, oh, it's got these chemicals in it. I was using a lot of, time's sorry, I am going to speed through this so you get all the. Oh, sorry. I'm going to continue because I don't have time. Clothing, used cotton, linen, silk, and hemp. I was thinking of bamboo for a while as a substitute. All this rayon that is coming from wood source or cellulose or something that sounded really good, plant-based. But it turns out that in the process of turning into clothing that you can use, they have to go through 3 sets of harsh chemicals. So, which is really damaging for the workers, and I don't know how much residual is in your clothing, but I'm thinking I don't need it. So go back to your good old cotton, linen, hemp, silk, wool. Food storage, I've been using a lot of glass. I noticed that plastic tops or silicone. Silicone is something that it's made of silicon and oxygen, and it is considered an endocrine disruptor in Europe. There's D4, D5, and D6 are endocrine disruptors, and we all know what that is now. And what it does is it's the xylazine, siloxane, I think that's how it's pronounced, gets released into your clothing in tops and food and whatnot. So if you have any, you use silicone, try to make sure it's just the lid and not the container. And definitely don't put it in heat.
Ivy, we're going to need to wrap things up.
Okay.